Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the hushed stone corridors of a medieval monastery, where the air smells of beeswax candles and dried herbs, and the only sounds are the soft shuffle of sandaled feet and the gentle scratch of quill on parchment. You can almost feel the cool dampness seeping through the thick walls as Brother Thomas carefully measures out willow bark powder, his weathered hands moving with the precision of someone who's done this 1,000 times before. The candlelight flickers across rows of clay pots, filled with mysterious remedies that would make your modern medicine cabinet look like a child's toy collection. Now, before you get too comfortable imagining yourself as some sort of medieval wellness guru, here's your reality check. You probably wouldn't survive a week in their world without antibiotics. But somehow, these monks managed to ease centuries of human suffering with nothing but plants, prayers, and an impressive amount of trial and error. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing our little global bedtime community come together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the heavy wooden door of the monastery's infirmary, watching as Brother Thomas tends to a fellow monk who's been complaining of aching joints after a long day copying manuscripts in the scriptorium. The patient sits on a simple wooden stool, his brown habit pulled up to reveal swollen knees that have seen too many hours kneeling in prayer. Thomas moves with deliberate calm, his movements almost ritualistic, as he prepares what looks like a simple poultice. But you're about to discover that there's nothing simple about medieval monastic medicine. The monastery infirmary isn't what you might expect. It's not some primitive cave filled with superstitious mumbling and random herbs thrown together in desperation. Instead, you're looking at what was essentially the Mayo Clinic of its time, a sophisticated medical facility where monks combined centuries of accumulated knowledge with careful observation and genuine compassion. These weren't just religious men playing doctor. They were the inheritors of medical traditions, stretching back to ancient Greece and Rome, filtered through Islamic scholarship and refined by generations of practical experience. Brother Thomas reaches for a ceramic jar labeled in careful Latin script, and you realize you're witnessing something remarkable, a medical system that treated the whole person, not just the symptoms. While modern medicine often focuses on quick fixes and targeted treatments, these medieval healers understood that physical pain was interconnected with spiritual and emotional well-being. They didn't just treat your headache. They considered your diet, your sleep, your state of mind, and yes, the condition of your soul. The monks' approach to healing aches and pains began with what they called the 6 non-naturals, a framework inherited from ancient Greek medicine that considered air, food and drink, motion and rest, sleep and waking, excretion and retention, and the passions of the mind. You watch as Thomas questions his patient, not just about the location and intensity of his pain, but about his recent meals, his sleep patterns, and whether anything has been troubling his spirit lately. It's like having a doctor, nutritionist, therapist, and spiritual advisor all rolled into one brown-robed package. The herbal remedies these monks used weren't random folk cures passed down through village gossip. They were based on sophisticated medical texts that had been carefully preserved and copied through the Dark Ages. You see Thomas consulting a thick manuscript, its pages filled with detailed illustrations of plants and precise instructions for their preparation. This is likely a copy of works by physicians like Dioscorides or Galen, whose medical knowledge had been kept alive in monastery libraries when much of the classical world's learning was being lost elsewhere. But here's where it gets interesting. Historians still argue whether medieval monks were primarily motivated by religious duty or genuine medical curiosity when they developed their healing practices. Some scholars suggest that caring for the sick was simply an extension of Christian charity, while others argue that these monasteries were centers of genuine scientific inquiry, where careful observation and experimentation led to real medical advances. As you watch Brother Thomas work, you notice something that would seem familiar to any modern practitioner of holistic medicine. He's not just treating the symptom, he's looking for the root cause. That aching knee isn't just a mechanical problem to be fixed with a quick remedy. It's a sign that something in the patient's life is out of balance. Maybe he's been spending too much time hunched over his manuscripts, or perhaps his diet lacks certain nutrients, or his spiritual practices have become a source of stress rather than peace. The monastery's approach to pain management was refreshingly practical, even by today's standards. They understood that chronic pain often had multiple contributing factors, and their treatments reflected this complexity. For a monk suffering from what we might now call repetitive stress injuries from copying manuscripts, the treatment might include herbal remedies for inflammation, dietary adjustments to improve overall health, modified work schedules to prevent further injury, and spiritual counseling to address any anxiety or depression that might be exacerbating the pain. Lean closer as Thomas begins preparing his remedy, and you're struck by the precision of his movements. This isn't some mystical ritual involving mysterious incantations and dramatic gestures. It's methodical, almost scientific in its approach. He measures ingredients with the same care a modern pharmacist might use, consulting his notes to ensure the proper proportions. The main ingredient appears to be willow bark, which you might recognize as the natural source of salicin, the compound that would eventually be synthesized into aspirin. Centuries later, the irony isn't lost on you. While we often think of medieval medicine as primitive and superstitious, these monks were actually using many of the same active compounds that form the basis of modern pain medications. They just didn't understand the biochemical mechanisms behind why their remedies worked. They only knew that they did work, based on centuries of careful observation and documentation. As Thomas grinds the willow bark with a heavy stone mortar and pestle, the rhythmic scraping sound fills the quiet infirmary, almost hypnotic in its regularity. You can smell the bitter, astringent scent of the bark as it releases its medicinal compounds, and you realize you're witnessing a process that connects this medieval monastery to healing traditions, stretching back thousands of years. The use of willow bark for pain relief was known to ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans, and here in this monastery, that knowledge is being carefully preserved and passed down to future generations. But the monks didn't rely solely on herbal remedies. Their approach to healing was remarkably comprehensive, incorporating what we might now call physical therapy, occupational therapy, and even psychological counseling. You watch as Thomas gently manipulates his patient's swollen joints, using techniques that wouldn't look out of place in a modern physiotherapy clinic. His touch is gentle but confident, and you can see the patient visibly relaxing under his care. The monastery infirmary also served as a kind of medieval research facility, where monks carefully documented the effects of different treatments and refined their techniques based on what they observed. They kept detailed records of which remedies worked for which conditions, how patients responded to different treatments, and what factors seemed to influence recovery. This wasn't just compassionate care, it was systematic medical research, conducted with the same dedication these monks brought to copying sacred texts. One of the most fascinating aspects of monastic medicine was its integration of spiritual and physical healing. The monks understood something that modern medicine is only beginning to rediscover, that the mind and body are intimately connected, and that emotional and spiritual distress can manifest as physical pain. Their treatments often included elements we might now recognize as meditation, counseling, and stress reduction techniques, all woven seamlessly into their medical practice. As you continue to observe Brother Thomas at work, you notice the profound sense of calm that permeates the entire infirmary. There's no sense of urgency or panic here, no rushing around or dramatic interventions. Instead, there's a deep patience, a recognition that healing takes time, and that the healer's role is to support the body's natural ability to restore itself. It's a philosophy that stands in stark contrast to our modern expectation of instant relief and quick fixes. The patient seems to be responding well to Thomas's ministrations, his face relaxing as the monk's skilled hands work to ease the tension in his swollen joints. You realize you're witnessing something that goes beyond mere medical treatment. This is healing as a form of spiritual practice, where the act of caring for another person's suffering becomes a way of serving God and expressing the deepest values of the monastic community. The morning bell hasn't yet rung for lauds when you find yourself following Brother Marcus through the monastery's herb garden, your feet crunching softly on the frost-covered paths between carefully tended beds of medicinal plants. The pre-dawn air is sharp and clean, carrying the mingled sense of rosemary, thyme, and something you can't quite identify, perhaps the earthy smell of comfrey leaves heavy with dew. Marcus moves with the quiet confidence of someone who knows every plant in this garden by touch. Even in the dim light that precedes sunrise, you're about to discover that this isn't just any garden. It's a living pharmacy, carefully designed and maintained according to principles that would impress any modern herbalist. The monks didn't just randomly scatter seeds and hope for the best. They organized their medicinal plants according to sophisticated systems of classification that took into account each plant's therapeutic properties, growing requirements, and compatibility with neighboring species. It's like walking through a medieval version of a modern hospital's pharmacy, except instead of sterile white shelves lined with pill bottles, you're surrounded by living, breathing medicine growing directly from the earth. Marcus stops beside a patch of what looks like ordinary grass. But as he kneels and gently brushes away the frost, you realize you're looking at meadowsweet, one of the monastery's most prized pain-relieving herbs. The plant's delicate white flowers won't appear for months yet, but Marcus explains in his soft, measured voice that the roots and leaves contain the same pain-fighting compounds that modern science would eventually isolate and synthesize into aspirin. The monks called it Queen of the Meadow, and they used it to treat everything from headaches to joint pain to fever. Here's something that might surprise you. Medieval monks were actually quite systematic in their approach to cultivating medicinal plants. They didn't just rely on whatever happened to grow wild in the surrounding countryside. They actively sought out seeds and cuttings from other monasteries, creating networks of botanical exchange that spanned across Europe. A monastery in England might trade seeds for their prized lavender with a monastery in France that specialized in growing superior sage, creating a kind of medieval pharmaceutical supply chain. As you follow Marcus deeper into the garden, he points out the careful attention paid to what we might now call companion planting. Certain herbs were grown together, not just because they had similar growing requirements, but because the monks had observed that some plants seemed to enhance each other's medicinal properties when grown in proximity. They planted chamomile near their roses not just because it looked pretty, but because they believed it strengthened the roses' healing properties and helped protect both plants from pests and diseases. The monastery's approach to harvesting these medicinal plants was almost ritualistic in its precision. Marcus explains that different parts of each plant had to be collected at specific times of day, in particular seasons, and even during certain phases of the moon. This wasn't just superstition, though there was certainly some of that mixed in, but was based on careful observation of when each plant's active compounds were at their peak concentration. Modern research has actually validated many of these traditional timing practices, showing that factors like time of day and season do indeed affect the concentration of active compounds in medicinal plants. You watch as Marcus carefully examines a patch of St. John's wort, its yellow flowers long since faded, but its leaves still containing the compounds that made it valuable for treating what the monks called melancholia, what we might now recognize as depression or anxiety. The monks had noticed that people suffering from persistent sadness or worry often experienced physical aches and pains as well, and they developed treatments that addressed both the emotional and physical symptoms simultaneously. It's a holistic approach that modern medicine is only beginning to fully appreciate. The garden itself is laid out according to principles that reflect both practical considerations and deeper philosophical beliefs about the nature of healing. The plants are arranged in a series of concentric circles, with the most commonly used remedies planted closest to the infirmary, and more specialized or dangerous plants located in the outer rings. This wasn't just for convenience. It reflected the monastic belief that healing should begin with the gentlest, safest remedies and only progress to more powerful interventions when necessary. Historians still argue whether the monks' extensive knowledge of plant medicine came primarily from classical sources like Dioscorides and Pliny, or whether it developed through their own experimentation and observation. The truth is probably a combination of both these. Monasteries served as bridges between the ancient world and the medieval period, preserving classical knowledge while also adding their own discoveries based on centuries of practical experience. As the first rays of sunlight begin to illuminate the garden, you notice something that speaks to the monks' sophisticated understanding of plant biochemistry, even though they lacked our modern scientific vocabulary to describe it. Different sections of the garden are designed to optimize the growing conditions for plants with different therapeutic properties. Sun-loving plants that produce aromatic compounds, like rosemary and thyme, are planted in the brightest, most exposed areas, while shade-preferring plants that contain more delicate alkaloids like foxglove and henbane are carefully protected under the canopy of larger plants or near the garden walls. Marcus leads you to a small greenhouse-like structure made of oiled parchment stretched over wooden frames, a medieval innovation that allowed the monks to extend their growing season and cultivate plants that wouldn't normally survive the harsh northern European winters. Inside, you find exotic specimens that must have been incredibly valuable. Ginger root for digestive complaints, cinnamon bark for circulation problems, and even small amounts of precious spices like cloves and nutmeg that were worth their weight in silver. The monks' understanding of plant preparation was remarkably sophisticated. They knew that some compounds were water-soluble and best extracted through teas and decoctions, while others required alcohol or oil-based preparations to be effective. They developed techniques for concentrating active compounds, creating what were essentially the medieval equivalents of modern standardized extracts. Their methods for drying, storing, and preserving medicinal plants ensured that their remedies remained potent throughout the long winter months. When fresh plants weren't available, you're particularly intrigued by a section of the garden dedicated to what Marcus calls sympathetic plants, herbs that were believed to treat ailments based on their physical resemblance to parts of the human body. While this might sound like primitive thinking, some of these associations actually had valid therapeutic basis. Lungwort, with its spotted leaves that resembled diseased lung tissue, was used to treat respiratory ailments, and modern research has confirmed that it does indeed contain compounds with expectorant and anti-inflammatory properties. The monastery garden also served as a living laboratory where the monks could observe the effects of different growing conditions on their plants' medicinal properties. They noticed that plants grown in different types of soil or exposed to different amounts of sunlight and water produced variations in their therapeutic effects. This led them to develop sophisticated cultivation techniques designed to maximize the potency of their medicinal plants knowledge that was carefully recorded and passed down through generations of monastery gardeners. As you walk among these carefully tended beds, you begin to appreciate the enormous amount of knowledge and skill required to maintain such a garden. The monks had to understand not just which plants were useful for which conditions, but also how to grow them successfully, when and how to harvest them for maximum potency, and how to prepare and preserve them for long-term storage. It was a complex science disguised as simple gardening, requiring years of study and experience to master the integration of this garden with the monastery's broader healing practices was seamless. Patients recovering in the infirmary could look out their windows and see the very plants that were being used to treat their ailments, creating a sense of connection between the healing process and the natural world. The monks believed that this visual connection enhanced the therapeutic effects of their remedies. An early recognition of what we might now call the placebo effect, or the importance of patient psychology in healing. Marcus pauses beside a patch of valerian, its roots still sleeping beneath the frozen earth, but already preparing for spring's awakening. He explains that this humble plant was one of their most valuable tools for treating pain, particularly the kind of chronic aching that seemed to worsen with stress and anxiety. The monks had observed that pain and emotional distress often went hand in hand, and they developed treatments that addressed both simultaneously. Valerian root, with its powerful sedative and muscle-relaxing properties, was perfect for patients whose physical pain was compounded by worry and sleeplessness. The scriptorium falls silent, except for the soft scratch of quills on parchment as you settle into the corner, where Brother Aldrich is carefully copying a medical manuscript that will preserve centuries of healing knowledge for future generations. The afternoon light streams through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that dance in the air like tiny spirits, and you can smell the rich scents of oak gall ink and freshly prepared vellum. Aldrich's weathered hands move with practiced precision, each letter formed with the same devotion he brings to copying sacred texts, because to these monks, healing knowledge was itself a form of sacred wisdom. You're looking over his shoulder at what appears to be a copy of the Medicina Antiqua, a compilation of classical medical knowledge that includes detailed instructions for treating various types of pain and physical discomfort. The manuscript is illuminated with beautiful drawings of medicinal plants, anatomical diagrams that show surprising accuracy for their time, and intricate decorative borders that transform medical information into works of art. But this isn't just pretty decoration. Every element of these manuscripts was designed to make the medical information as clear and memorable as possible. The text Aldrich is copying describes a treatment protocol for what medieval physicians called dolor articularum, joint pain that we might now recognize as arthritis. The recommended treatment is surprisingly comprehensive, involving not just herbal remedies, but also dietary modifications, physical exercises, and what can only be described as an early form of cognitive behavioral therapy. The monks understood that chronic pain affected every aspect of a person's life, and their treatments reflected this holistic understanding. As you read over Aldrich's shoulder, you notice that the manuscript includes detailed case studies, actual records of patients treated at various monasteries, with careful documentation of symptoms, treatments used, and outcomes achieved. These weren't just theoretical medical texts, but practical handbooks based on real clinical experience. One case describes a monk who suffered from severe back pain after years of copying manuscripts in poor posture, and the successful treatment that combined willow bark tea, gentle stretching exercises, and modifications to his work environment. Here's something that might blow your mind. These medieval monks were actually conducting what we would now recognize as clinical trials. They would try different treatments on patients with similar conditions and carefully document the results, gradually refining their techniques based on what they observed. They even understood the importance of what we might now call control groups. They would sometimes compare the recovery rates of patients who received their herbal treatments with those who received only prayer and rest. The manuscript Aldrich is copying includes a fascinating section on what the monks called temperamental medicine, treatments that were customized based on each patient's individual constitution. They believed that people could be classified into different types based on their physical characteristics, personality traits, and susceptibility to various ailments. A person with a sanguine temperament might require different pain treatments than someone with a melancholic disposition, and the monks developed sophisticated systems for matching treatments to individual patients. Historians still argue whether this temperamental approach to medicine was based on valid observations about individual differences in drug metabolism and pain sensitivity, or whether it was simply an elaborate system of medical astrology. Modern research suggests that there may have been more validity to their observations than previously thought. We now know that genetic differences do indeed affect how people respond to different medications and treatments. You watch as Aldrich carefully illustrates a diagram showing the proper technique for preparing a poultice using comfrey root and honey. The drawing is remarkably detailed, showing not just the ingredients, but also the specific tools needed, the proper consistency of the finished preparation, and even the correct way to apply it to achieve maximum therapeutic benefit. These manuscripts served as comprehensive training manuals for monks who would be responsible for treating their communities' medical needs. The monastery's medical manuscripts also included what we might now recognize as pharmaceutical chemistry detailed instructions for extracting, concentrating, and standardizing the active compounds in medicinal plants. The monks had developed techniques for creating what they called essences and quintessences, concentrated preparations that were much more potent than simple herbal teas. They understood that different extraction methods would yield different therapeutic effects, and they carefully documented which techniques worked best for which conditions. One particularly interesting section of the manuscript describes the use of what the monks called sympathetic remedies, treatments that worked through symbolic or spiritual connections, rather than direct pharmacological action. While this might sound like pure superstition, modern research into the placebo effect and the role of belief in healing suggests that these approaches may have had genuine therapeutic value, particularly for conditions involving chronic pain, where psychological factors play a significant role. The monks' approach to documenting their medical knowledge was remarkably systematic. They didn't just copy existing text, they added their own observations, modifications, and improvements based on their practical experience. Margins of these manuscripts are filled with notes like, "This worked well for Brother Francis's headaches," or "Try adding more honey to make it more palatable for children." These annotations transform ancient medical texts into living documents that evolved with each generation of monastic healers. As Aldrich continues his careful copying, you notice that the manuscript includes detailed seasonal calendars showing when different medicinal plants should be harvested, when certain treatments are most effective, and even when patients are most likely to experience flare-ups of chronic conditions. The monks had observed that many pain conditions followed predictable patterns related to weather, seasons, and even lunar cycles, and they incorporated this knowledge into their treatment protocols. The preservation of medical knowledge in these monasteries was literally a matter of life and death. During the turbulent medieval period, when wars, plagues, and social upheaval regularly disrupted communities, the monasteries served as islands of stability where crucial knowledge could be safely preserved. Without the dedicated work of monks like Aldrich, much of the classical world's medical wisdom would have been lost forever, leaving future generations to rediscover through trial and error what had already been learned centuries earlier. You're struck by the incredible attention to detail in these medical manuscripts. Every remedy includes not just the basic recipe, but also warnings about potential side effects, contraindications for certain types of patients, and detailed instructions for recognizing when a treatment isn't working and should be discontinued. The monks understood that even natural remedies could be dangerous if used improperly, and they took great care to document both the benefits and risks of their treatments. The manuscript also includes what appears to be an early form of medical ethics guidelines for how healers should interact with their patients, when it's appropriate to try experimental treatments, and how to balance hope with honesty when dealing with serious or terminal conditions. The monks believed that healing involved not just treating physical symptoms, but also providing emotional and spiritual support to patients and their families. As the afternoon light begins to fade, Aldrich lights a candle to continue his work. And you realize you're witnessing something profound, the preservation of human knowledge and compassion in written form. Each carefully formed letter represents not just information, but wisdom gained through centuries of caring for human suffering. These manuscripts were more than medical textbooks. They were repositories of accumulated human experience, passed down from one generation of healers to the next. The monks' medical manuscripts also served as a form of quality control, ensuring that treatments were prepared and administered consistently across different monasteries and different generations of healers. By carefully documenting exact recipes, preparation methods, and treatment protocols, they created a standardized system of medical care that was remarkably advanced for its time. A monk trained in one monastery could travel to another and immediately understand and contribute to their medical practices, One of the most fascinating aspects of these manuscripts is their integration of medical and spiritual wisdom. The monks didn't see physical healing and spiritual care as separate activities. They understood that true healing involved treating the whole person, including their emotional and spiritual needs. Their medical texts include prayers and meditations, designed to be used alongside physical treatments, creating a comprehensive approach to healing that addressed every aspect of human suffering. The soft chanting of Vespers echoes through the stone corridors as you follow Sister Marguerite into the women's section of the monastery infirmary, where a different but equally sophisticated approach to healing unfolds in the gentle hands of the nuns. The air here carries the subtle fragrance of lavender and rosewater, and you notice that the atmosphere feels somehow warmer and more nurturing than the men's quarters, though no less professional in its approach to medical care. Sister Marguerite moves with quiet confidence between the beds where several women are recovering from various ailments. Her healing touch informed by centuries of feminine wisdom about the body's needs and rhythms. You're about to discover that. Medieval nuns brought unique perspectives and skills to the practice of medicine, often specializing in areas where their life experiences gave them particular insight. While the male monks might excel at treating injuries from manual labor or copying-related illness, the nuns had developed sophisticated approaches to treating conditions that affected women specifically, as well as pioneering techniques in what we might now call palliative care and chronic pain management. Sister Marguerite pauses beside the bed of an elderly woman who has been suffering from what appears to be severe arthritis in her hands and wrists. The patient's fingers are swollen and twisted, making even simple tasks like holding a cup or turning the pages of a prayer book nearly impossible. But instead of simply applying a standard herbal remedy, you watch as the nun begins what can only be described as an early form of occupational therapy, gently manipulating the woman's joints while teaching her specific exercises designed to maintain mobility and reduce pain. The nuns had observed that many of their patients, particularly older women, suffered from conditions that couldn't be cured but could be managed with the right combination of treatments and lifestyle modifications. They developed what was essentially the medieval equivalent of chronic pain management programs, combining herbal remedies with physical therapy, dietary counseling, and psychological support to help patients maintain the best possible quality of life despite their limitations. Here's something that might surprise you. Medieval nuns were often more innovative and experimental in their medical approaches than their male counterparts. While the monks tended to rely heavily on classical texts and established authorities, the nuns were more likely to develop new treatments based on their own observations and experiences. They had to be many of the medical conditions they dealt with weren't well covered in the ancient texts, which were written primarily by and for men. Sister Marguerite shows you a collection of specialized tools that the nuns had developed for treating various types of pain and mobility issues. There are carefully carved wooden splints for supporting injured joints, soft leather braces for providing gentle compression to swollen areas, and even primitive versions of what we might now recognize as massage tools, smooth stones of various sizes and shapes that could be heated and used to apply therapeutic pressure to sore muscles and joints. The nuns' approach to pain management was particularly sophisticated when it came to what we might now call women's health issues. They had developed detailed understanding of how hormonal cycles affected pain sensitivity and had created treatment protocols that took these fluctuations into account. A woman suffering from headaches might receive different treatments depending on where she was in her monthly cycle, and the nuns had observed that certain herbal remedies were more or less effective at different times of the month. Historians still argue whether the nuns' medical knowledge came primarily from oral traditions, passed down through generations of women, or whether they had access to the same classical texts as the male monastics. The evidence suggests it was probably a combination of both. The nuns certainly had access to medical manuscripts, but they also preserved and developed folk healing traditions that had been passed down through maternal lineages for centuries. Notice that the nuns' infirmary includes what appears to be an early version of a physical therapy room, with various pieces of equipment designed to help patients regain strength and mobility after injuries or during recovery from chronic conditions. There are wooden bars at different heights for practicing walking and balance, soft mats for floor exercises, and even a collection of weighted objects that patients could use to gradually rebuild strength in weakened limbs. The psychological aspects of the nuns' healing practice were particularly advanced. They understood that chronic pain often led to depression and despair, and they had developed sophisticated counseling techniques to help patients cope with their conditions. Sister Marguerite explains that they often used what we might now recognize as cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, helping patients identify and change negative thought patterns that could worsen their perception of pain, one of the most innovative aspects of the nuns' medical practice was their approach to what they called comfort care, treatments designed not to cure, but to provide relief and dignity to patients who were suffering from terminal or incurable conditions. They developed specialized techniques for managing pain in dying patients, using combinations of herbal remedies, physical comfort measures, and spiritual support to ease the transition from life to death. The nuns also pioneered what we might now recognize as family therapy, recognizing that chronic illness affected not just the patient, but their entire support network. They provided counseling and support to family members, taught them how to provide basic care at home, and helped them cope with the emotional challenges of caring for a loved one with a chronic condition. This holistic approach to healing extended the monastery's influence far beyond its walls. You watch as Sister Marguerite demonstrates a technique for treating headaches that involves gentle pressure applied to specific points on the scalp and neck. Her movements are precise and confident, suggesting years of practice and refinement. She explains that they had mapped out what they called tender points on the human body areas where gentle pressure could provide relief from various types of pain. Modern research into trigger points and acupressure suggests that many of their observations were remarkably accurate. The nuns' herbal preparations often differed from those used by the male monastics, not just in their ingredients, but in their methods of preparation and administration. They had developed techniques for creating what they called gentle medicines remedies that were less likely to cause side effects or interact negatively with other treatments. This was particularly important when treating elderly patients, or those with multiple health conditions who might be taking several different remedies simultaneously. The integration of spiritual and physical healing was particularly seamless in the nuns' practice. They understood that pain and suffering could be opportunities for spiritual growth and deeper connection with the divine, but they also believed that unnecessary suffering served no purpose and should be relieved whenever possible. Their treatments often included prayers and meditations, specifically designed to help patients find meaning and purpose in their experiences of pain and illness. Sister Marguerite leads you to a small room where several nuns are preparing what appears to be a complex herbal formula. The recipe requires precise timing and temperature control, with different ingredients added at specific intervals and the entire mixture stirred in a particular pattern while prayers are recited. This isn't just medical preparation, it's a form of sacred ritual that transforms the act of making medicine into a spiritual practice that the nuns believed enhanced the healing properties of their remedies. The nuns' medical practice also included what we might now recognize as preventive medicine treatments and lifestyle recommendations designed to prevent pain and illness before they occurred. They provided dietary counseling, taught exercises for maintaining flexibility and strength, and offered guidance on managing stress and emotional challenges that could manifest as physical symptoms. Their approach was truly holistic, addressing every aspect of human health and being dot as evening approaches and the light from the tall windows begins to fade. You realize that you've been witnessing something extraordinary, a form of medical practice that combined scientific observation with deep compassion, technical skill with spiritual wisdom, and individual care with community support. The nuns' approach to healing represented the best of medieval medicine, sophisticated, humane, and remarkably effective given the limitations of their time and resources. The midnight bell tolls as you find yourself in the monastery's most secretive chamber, the laboratorium, where Brother Joachim works by candlelight, carefully distilling essences and preparing the concentrated remedies that represent the cutting edge of medieval pharmaceutical science. The room is filled with an array of glass vessels, copper alembics, and ceramic retorts that wouldn't look entirely out of place in a modern chemistry lab, though the dancing shadows cast by the flickering candles give everything an almost mystical quality. The air is thick with the sense of alcohol vapors, aromatic herbs, and something indefinably medicinal that makes your nostrils tingle. You're about to witness what was essentially medieval chemistry in action, as Brother Joachim demonstrates. The sophisticated techniques these monastic healers had developed for extracting, concentrating, and purifying the active compounds in their medicinal plants. This isn't the simple herb gathering and tea making you might expect from medieval medicine. This is advanced pharmaceutical preparation that required years of training and a deep understanding of what we would now call organic chemistry. Even though they lacked our modern scientific vocabulary to describe what they were doing, Joachim carefully adjusts the flame beneath a glass vessel containing what appears to be a mixture of alcohol and crushed willow bark. Steam rises from the mixture, carrying with it the concentrated essence of the plant's pain-relieving compounds. He explains in hushed tones that this process of distillation allows them to create remedies that are many times more potent than simple herbal teas, while also removing potentially harmful impurities that might cause unwanted side effects. The monastery's laboratory represents the convergence of several different traditions of knowledge: classical Greek and Roman medicine, Islamic alchemical techniques, and indigenous European folk healing practices. The monks had access to translated works by Islamic scholars like al-Razi and Ibn Sina, who had preserved and expanded upon the pharmaceutical knowledge of the ancient world. These texts provided detailed instructions for creating concentrated medicines, standardizing dosages, and even conducting what we might now recognize as quality control testing. Here's something that might blow your mind. These medieval monks were actually creating standardized pharmaceutical preparations centuries before the modern pharmaceutical industry existed. They understood that the potency of herbal remedies could vary dramatically depending on factors like the plant's growing conditions, harvest timing, and preparation methods. To address this problem, they developed sophisticated techniques for testing and standardizing their preparations to ensure consistent therapeutic effects. You watch as Joachim demonstrates a process for creating what he calls quinta essentia, the fifth essence, which was believed to contain the most concentrated healing properties of a plant. The process involves multiple stages of distillation, each one removing different types of impurities while concentrating the desired therapeutic compounds. The final product is a clear, potent liquid that contains the equivalent of many pounds of raw plant material in just a few drops. The monks' understanding of dosage and administration was remarkably sophisticated. They had observed that the same remedy could have dramatically different effects depending on how much was given, how often it was administered, and even what time of day it was taken. Their laboratory notes include detailed charts showing optimal dosing schedules for different conditions, with careful attention to factors like the patient's age, weight, and overall health status. Joachim shows you a collection of small glass vials, each containing a different concentrated essence and labeled with precise instructions for use. There's essence of valerian for sleep disorders and anxiety-related pain, concentrated meadowsweet for inflammatory conditions, and a complex preparation combining multiple herbs for treating what they called melancholic humors, depression, and anxiety that often accompanied chronic pain conditions. The laboratory also contains equipment for creating what the monks called magisteries, highly purified mineral preparations that were used to treat specific types of ailments. These weren't just ground-up rocks and metals, but sophisticated chemical preparations that required careful heating, cooling, and purification processes to create therapeutic compounds. You watch as Joachim demonstrates the preparation of what appears to be a calcium-based remedy, carefully heating limestone in a special furnace until it transforms into quicklime, then treating it with various solutions to create a preparation that could be safely administered to patients suffering from bone and joint problems. Historians still argue whether these monastic alchemists were primarily motivated by medical goals or whether they were pursuing the more mystical aspects of alchemy, the search for the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. The evidence suggests that most monastery laboratories were focused on practical medical applications, though they certainly weren't immune to the allure of discovering universal remedies that could cure all ailments. The monks had developed an impressive understanding of what we would now call pharmacokinetics, how the body absorbs, distributes, and eliminates different compounds. They knew that some remedies worked best when taken on an empty stomach, while others needed to be consumed with food to prevent stomach irritation. They understood that certain preparations were more effective when applied topically, while others needed to be ingested to reach the affected areas of the body. You notice that Joachim's laboratory notes include detailed observations about drug interactions, how different remedies might enhance or interfere with each other's effects when used simultaneously. This wasn't just theoretical knowledge, but practical wisdom gained through careful observation of patients who were receiving multiple treatments. They had learned, for example, that certain herbal preparations could enhance the effects of their concentrated essences, while others might cause dangerous reactions. The process of creating these concentrated remedies was incredibly time-consuming and required enormous patience. Some preparations needed to be distilled multiple times over periods of weeks or even months, with the monk tending to the process day and night to ensure optimal results. It was a form of meditation in action, where the physical process of creating medicine became a spiritual practice that connected the healer to the deeper mysteries of nature and healing. Brother, Joachim shows you a particularly complex preparation that he's been working on for nearly 3 months. A concentrated essence, designed to treat what we might now recognize as fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. The preparation combines essences from more than a dozen different plants, each one added at a specific stage of the distillation process and in precise proportions based on years of experimentation and refinement. The monastery's laboratory served not just as a production facility, but as a research center where new remedies were developed and existing ones were improved. The monks kept detailed records of their experiments, noting which combinations of ingredients produced the best results, which preparation methods yielded the most potent products, and which patients responded best to different types of treatments. It was systematic pharmaceutical research conducted with the same dedication they brought to copying sacred texts. One of the most innovative aspects of their pharmaceutical work was the development of what they called compound remedies preparations that combined multiple active ingredients to create synergistic effects. They had observed that certain combinations of herbs produced better results than any single ingredient used alone, and they spent considerable effort trying to understand and optimize these interactions. Modern research into herbal medicine has confirmed many of their observations about synergistic effects. The laboratory also contained equipment for creating what we might now recognize as sustained release formulations preparations designed to deliver their active ingredients slowly over extended periods. They achieved this through various techniques, including embedding active compounds in wax matrices that would dissolve gradually in the body, or creating layered preparations where different ingredients would be released at different rates. You're particularly fascinated by a section of the laboratory dedicated to what Joachim calls sympathetic preparations, remedies, created according to astrological principles and designed to work in harmony with the patient's individual constitution and the cosmic influences affecting their condition. While this might sound like pure superstition, some modern research suggests that factors like circadian rhythms and seasonal variations do indeed affect how the body responds to different medications. The monks' pharmaceutical preparations weren't just more potent than simple herbal remedies. They were also more stable and had longer shelf lives. Through their distillation and purification processes, they could create medicines that would remain effective for months or even years when properly stored. This was crucial for a monastery that needed to maintain medical supplies through long winters when fresh herbs weren't available. The quality control measures used in the monastery laboratory were remarkably sophisticated. Each batch of concentrated essence was tested for potency, purity, and consistency before being approved for use. They had developed simple but effective tests for identifying adulterated or contaminated preparations, and they maintained strict standards for the purity of their starting materials. Only the finest herbs, harvested at optimal times and properly dried and stored, were deemed suitable for creating their concentrated remedies. As you watch Brother Joachim work, you're struck by the profound sense of responsibility he brings to his task. He understands that the preparations he creates will be used to treat real people suffering from real pain, and he approaches each step of the process with the same careful attention he would bring to preparing the sacred elements. For Mass, there's no room for carelessness or shortcuts when people's health and well-being depend on the quality of your work. The monastery's pharmaceutical laboratory also served as a training center where younger monks learned the complex skills required to create these advanced preparations. The learning process took years and required not just memorizing recipes and procedures, but developing the intuitive understanding of chemical processes that comes only through extensive hands-on experience. It was a form of apprenticeship that ensured the monastery's pharmaceutical knowledge would be passed down to future generations. Dawn breaks over the monastery walls as you join Brother Benedict in the warming kitchen, where the intersection of food and medicine reveals itself in ways that would make any modern nutritionist nod in approval. The large stone hearth radiates gentle heat, while Benedict tends to several pots of what appear to be simple broths. But you quickly realize these aren't just meals. They're carefully crafted therapeutic preparations designed to nourish the body while delivering specific medicinal compounds to patients recovering from various ailments. The aroma filling the kitchen is complex and inviting. Chicken bones simmering with ginger and turmeric, barley cooking slowly with anti-inflammatory herbs, and something that smells distinctly like cinnamon and cloves, warming in a smaller pot near the back of the hearth. Benedict moves between his preparations with the focused attention of both chef and pharmacist, tasting, adjusting seasonings, and monitoring cooking times with a precision that speaks to years of experience in using food as medicine. You're about to discover that medieval monks were pioneers in what we now call nutritional therapy, the use of specific foods and dietary modifications to treat illness and promote healing. They understood something that modern medicine is only beginning to fully appreciate, that the line between food and medicine is often arbitrary, and that many of the most effective treatments for chronic pain and inflammatory conditions can be found in the kitchen rather than the pharmacy. Brother Benedict explains that the monastery follows what they call the doctrine of signatures, not just the mystical belief that plants resembling body parts could treat related ailments, but a more practical understanding that foods with certain colors, textures, and flavors often contained compounds that could address specific health problems. Red foods like beets and cherries were used to treat blood disorders. Yellow foods like turmeric and saffron were employed for liver conditions. And bitter foods were recognized as particularly effective for digestive complaints. Here's something that might surprise you. The monks had developed sophisticated understanding of what we now call anti-inflammatory diets centuries before modern science identified inflammation as a key factor in chronic pain conditions. They had observed that patients who consumed certain combinations of foods experienced less pain and faster healing, and they developed detailed dietary protocols based on these observations. The therapeutic broths Benedict is preparing represent the culmination of centuries of experimentation with medicinal cooking. Each recipe has been refined through generations of monastic healers, with ingredients and proportions adjusted based on careful observation of patient responses. The chicken broth simmering in the largest pot contains not just bones and meat, but carefully selected herbs like ginger for inflammation, garlic for infection, and fennel for digestive support. You watch as Benedict adds a pinch of what appears to be ground willow bark to one of his preparations, the same compound that would eventually be synthesized into aspirin, but here delivered in a form that's gentle on the stomach and combined with other ingredients that enhance its absorption and effectiveness. The monks had learned that many medicinal compounds were more effective and caused fewer side effects when consumed as part of a complete meal rather than taken in isolation. The monastery kitchen also served as a laboratory for developing what we might now recognize as functional foods, ordinary meals, enhanced with specific medicinal ingredients to provide therapeutic benefits. Benedict shows you loaves of bread that have been enriched with ground flaxseed for omega-3 fatty acids, honey infused with anti-inflammatory herbs, and even beer that's been brewed with medicinal plants to create what was essentially liquid. Medicine disguised as a beverage. Historians still argue whether the monks' sophisticated understanding of nutritional therapy developed independently through their own observations, or whether it was influenced by classical medical texts and Islamic scholarship. The truth is probably a combination of both. The monasteries served as centers where different traditions of knowledge could meet and cross-pollinate, creating new approaches to healing that drew from multiple sources. The monks' approach to therapeutic cooking was remarkably personalized. Benedict explains that different patients receive different dietary protocols based on their individual constitutions, current symptoms, and overall health status. A patient suffering from hot, inflammatory conditions might receive cooling foods like cucumber and mint, while someone with cold, stagnant symptoms would be given warming spices and stimulating herbs. You notice that the kitchen contains an impressive array of medicinal spices and seasonings, many of which would have been incredibly expensive and difficult to obtain. There are small quantities of precious items like saffron, cardamom, and long pepper, alongside more common but equally important ingredients like ginger, cinnamon, and various local herbs. The monks understood that these weren't just flavor enhancers, but powerful medicines that could be incorporated into daily meals. The timing and frequency of meals was also considered therapeutically important. The monks had observed that the body's ability to digest and absorb nutrients varied throughout the day, and they scheduled meals and medicinal foods accordingly. Patients with certain conditions might receive small, frequent meals to maintain stable blood sugar and energy levels, while others might benefit from longer periods of fasting followed by carefully planned therapeutic feasts. Benedict demonstrates the preparation of what he calls invalid food, specially prepared meals for patients who are too weak or ill to consume regular monastery fare. These preparations are designed to be easily digestible while providing maximum nutritional and medicinal value. You watch him create a smooth, nourishing gruel from barley, honey, and medicinal herbs that could provide sustenance and healing compounds to patients who might otherwise be unable to eat. A monastery's approach to therapeutic cooking also included what we might now recognize as elimination diet systematic, removal of potentially problematic foods to identify dietary triggers for various symptoms. They had observed that certain patients experienced flare-ups of pain or other symptoms when they consumed specific foods, and they developed protocols for identifying and avoiding these triggers while ensuring adequate nutrition. One of the most innovative aspects of the monastic approach to food as medicine was their understanding of the psychological and social aspects of eating. They recognized that sharing meals was an important part of the healing process, providing not just physical nourishment, but emotional support and social connection. Patients who were able to eat with others often recovered more quickly than those who took their meals in isolation. The kitchen also served as a center for preserving and storing medicinal foods throughout the year. Benedict shows you various techniques for maintaining the therapeutic properties of foods during long-term storage. Herbs dried and stored in specific ways to preserve their active compounds. Fruits preserved in honey to maintain their vitamin content. and fermented preparations that actually increased in medicinal value over time. You're particularly intrigued by the monastery's approach to what they called comfort foods, preparations designed not just to provide nutrition, but to lift the spirits and provide emotional support to patients dealing with chronic pain or serious illness. These weren't just indulgences, but carefully crafted combinations of ingredients known to have mood-enhancing properties, often including items like chocolate, vanilla, and various aromatic spices. The integration of the kitchen with the rest of the monastery's healing practices was seamless. Patients' dietary needs were discussed during medical consultations, and their meal plans were adjusted based on their response to other treatments. The monks understood that nutrition was just one component of a comprehensive approach to healing, but they also recognized it as a foundation upon which other therapies could build as the morning progresses, and the kitchen fills with the sounds and aromas of therapeutic cooking. You begin to appreciate the enormous skill and knowledge required to use food as medicine effectively. Benedict's work requires not just culinary expertise, but deep understanding of medicinal plants, human physiology, and the complex interactions between different nutrients and therapeutic compounds. The afternoon sun slants through the infirmary windows as you observe Brother Matthias, demonstrating what can only be described as medieval physical therapy, his gentle hands working to restore mobility to a fellow monk whose shoulders have become stiff and painful from years of hunching. Over manuscripts in the scriptorium, the patient lies face down on a simple wooden table covered with soft wool blankets, and you can see the visible relief in his posture as Matthias applies careful pressure to specific points along his spine and shoulder blades. You're witnessing something that challenges every assumption you might have about medieval medicine being primitive or purely herbal-based. Brother Matthias moves with the confidence and skill of someone who understands human anatomy in remarkable detail, his techniques based on centuries of careful observation and refinement. This isn't random massage or hopeful manipulation. It's systematic therapeutic bodywork that addresses specific muscular and skeletal problems with precision and expertise. The monastery's approach to what they called manual healing drew from multiple traditions, classical Greek and Roman knowledge of anatomy and physiology, techniques learned from Islamic physicians who had preserved and expanded upon ancient medical knowledge, and indigenous European folk healing practices that had been passed down through generations of healers. The result was a sophisticated system of physical therapy that could address a wide range of musculoskeletal problems. Brother Matthias explains that the monks had mapped what they called tender points throughout the human body areas where gentle pressure could provide relief from various types of pain and dysfunction. Modern research into trigger points and myofascial release suggests that many of their observations were remarkably accurate, identifying the same problematic areas that contemporary physical therapists target in their treatments. Here's something that might surprise you. The monks had developed detailed understanding of what we now call biomechanics, how the body moves and how poor movement patterns can lead to pain and injury. They had observed that many of their patients' problems stem not from acute injuries, but from repetitive stress and poor posture, particularly among the scribes who spent long hours bent over their manuscripts. You watch as Matthias demonstrates a series of gentle stretching exercises designed to counteract the effects of prolonged sitting and writing. The movements are slow and controlled, with careful attention to proper alignment and breathing. He explains that these exercises should be performed several times, throughout the day to prevent the accumulation of tension and stiffness that could lead to chronic pain problems. The monks' understanding of the connection between physical and emotional tension was particularly sophisticated. They had observed that stress, anxiety, and emotional distress often manifested as physical tension, and pain, particularly in areas like the neck, shoulders, and back. Their manual healing techniques were designed to address both the physical symptoms and the underlying emotional causes above. Muscular tension. Matthias shows you a collection of tools that the monks had developed for their physical therapy work. Smooth stones of various sizes that could be heated and used for deep tissue massage, wooden implements carved into specific shapes for applying pressure to hard-to-reach areas, and even primitive versions of what we might now recognize as exercise equipment, wooden bars and weights that patients could use to rebuild strength and flexibility. The monastery's approach to physical rehabilitation was remarkably comprehensive. Patients didn't just receive treatment for their immediate symptoms. They were taught exercises and techniques they could use to prevent future problems and maintain their improvement over time. This emphasis on patient education and self-care was centuries ahead of its time and reflects a sophisticated understanding of the chronic nature of many musculoskeletal problems. Historians still argue whether the monks' manual healing techniques were primarily influenced by classical medical texts or whether they developed independently through practical experience and observation. The evidence suggests it was probably a combination of both. The monasteries had access to ancient medical knowledge, but they also served as centers where different healing traditions could meet and evolve. You notice that Brother Matthias pays careful attention to each patient's individual needs and limitations. The same basic techniques might be modified significantly depending on the patient's age, overall health status, and specific condition. An elderly monk with arthritis would receive very different treatment than a young novice recovering from a work-related injury, even if both were experiencing similar symptoms. The monks had also developed what we might now recognize as ergonomic principles, guidelines for organizing work environments and activities to prevent injury and reduce strain on the body. The scriptorium had been designed with careful attention to lighting, seating, and work surface height to minimize the physical stress of copying manuscripts. Monks were taught proper posture and encouraged to take regular breaks to prevent the development of repetitive stress injuries. One of the most innovative aspects of the monastic approach to physical therapy was their integration of breathing techniques and meditation with manual treatment. Matthias demonstrates how proper breathing can enhance the effectiveness of stretching and massage, helping patients relax more deeply and allowing their muscles to release tension more completely. This mind-body approach to healing was centuries ahead of its time. The monastery's physical therapy program also included what we might now recognize as occupational therapy, helping patients adapt their daily activities to accommodate physical limitations and prevent further injury. Monks who had developed problems with their hands and wrists from writing might be taught modified techniques for holding their quills, or they might be assigned to different types of work that would allow their injuries to heal while still contributing to the monastery's activities. You watch as Matthias works with a patient who appears to be recovering from what might have been a stroke or similar neurological event. His techniques are gentle but persistent, designed to help the patient regain as much function as possible while working within the limitations imposed by his condition. The approach is both realistic and optimistic, accepting what cannot be changed while working diligently to improve what can be helped. The monks understanding of pain management through physical therapy was particularly sophisticated. They recognized that chronic pain often involved both physical and psychological components, and their treatments were designed to address both aspects simultaneously. A gentle, caring touch of manual therapy provided not just physical relief, but emotional comfort and human connection that could be just as important as the mechanical effects of the treatment. Brother Matthias explains that their manual healing techniques were often combined with other treatments, herbal remedies to reduce inflammation, dietary modifications to support healing, and spiritual counseling to address the emotional aspects of chronic pain and disability. This integrated approach to treatment recognized that effective healing required attention to all aspects of human experience, not just the immediate physical symptoms. The training required to become proficient in these manual healing techniques was extensive and demanding. Young monks spent years learning anatomy and physiology, practicing their techniques under close supervision and developing the sensitivity and intuition required to work effectively with the human body. It was both an art and a science, requiring technical knowledge and compassionate understanding in equal measure. As you continue to observe Brother Matthias at work, you're struck by the profound sense of reverence he brings to his healing practice. He treats each patient's body as something sacred, worthy of the same careful attention and respect he would bring to handling a precious religious relic. This attitude transforms the practice of physical therapy from a merely technical intervention into a form of spiritual service. Evening shadows lengthen across the monastery garden as you find yourself in the company of Brother Francis, whose specialty lies in what the medieval world called the healing of melancholic humors, the treatment of what we might now recognize as depression, anxiety, and the chronic pain conditions that so often accompany emotional distress. The setting is peaceful, a small enclosed garden filled with aromatic herbs like lavender, chamomile, and lemon balm, their gentle fragrances carried on the cooling evening breeze as Francis tends to a patient whose physical complaints seem inextricably linked to deeper spiritual and emotional struggles. You're about to witness something that modern medicine is only beginning to fully appreciate: the profound connection between mental and physical health, and the sophisticated approaches medieval healers developed for treating what we now call psychosomatic conditions. Brother Francis understands that the monk sitting beside him, complaining of persistent headaches and muscle tension, is suffering from more than just physical ailments. His pain is the bodily expression of anxiety, grief, and spiritual crisis. That requires healing on multiple levels. The patient, Brother Thomas, had recently lost his elderly mentor and was struggling with doubts about his vocation and his place in the monastic community. His physical symptoms, chronic headaches, neck and shoulder tension, digestive problems, and difficulty sleeping, had appeared shortly after his mentor's death and had proven resistant to conventional herbal remedies and manual treatments. Francis recognized that Thomas was experiencing what medieval physicians called sorrow sickness, a condition that required healing of both body and soul. Brother Francis begins his treatment not with herbs or physical manipulation, but with what can only be described as an early form of psychotherapy. He listens carefully as Thomas describes not just his physical symptoms, but his emotional state, his fears about the future, and his struggles with grief and uncertainty. Francis asks gentle but probing questions, helping Thomas explore the connections between his emotional distress and his physical pain. Here's something that might blow your mind. Medieval monks had developed sophisticated understanding of what we now call the mind-body connection, centuries before modern psychology and neuroscience provided scientific explanations for these phenomena. They observed that emotional distress could manifest as physical symptoms, and they developed treatment approaches that addressed both aspects of suffering simultaneously. The monastery's approach to treating melancholic conditions was remarkably comprehensive. Francis explains that their treatments typically included herbal remedies to support emotional balance, dietary modifications to nourish the nervous system, physical activities to release tension and promote well-being, and spiritual practices designed to provide meaning and hope in the face of suffering. It was an integrated approach that recognized the complex interplay between different aspects of human experience. You watch as Francis prepares what he calls heart-opening herbal blend, combining herbs like hawthorn, rose petals, and motherwort that were believed to have specific effects on emotional well-being. Modern research has actually confirmed that many of these plants contain compounds that can affect neurotransmitter function and help regulate mood. Though the monks understood their effects through careful observation rather than biochemical analysis, the garden setting itself is an important part of the treatment. Francis has chosen this location deliberately, understanding that contact with nature and beauty can have powerful healing effects on both mind and body. The gentle sounds of bees among the flowers, the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze, and the peaceful atmosphere of the enclosed garden all contribute to creating an environment conducive to healing and reflection. Brother Francis guides Thomas through what appears to be an early form of mindfulness meditation, encouraging him to focus on his breathing and observe his thoughts and feelings without judgment. The technique is simple but profound. By learning to witness his mental and emotional states with compassionate detachment, Thomas can begin to break the cycle of anxiety and rumination that has been contributing to his physical symptoms. Historians still argue whether the monk's sophisticated understanding of psychological healing came primarily from classical sources, like the works of early Christian mystics and philosophers, or whether it developed through their own practical experience. In dealing with the emotional challenges of monastic life, the evidence suggests it was probably a combination of both. The monasteries preserved ancient wisdom, while also serving as laboratories for developing new approaches to spiritual and emotional healing. The monks had observed that different types of emotional distress required different treatment approaches. Francis explains that acute grief, like what Thomas is experiencing, needed to be honored and processed rather than simply suppressed or medicated away. The goal wasn't to eliminate painful emotions, but to help patients develop healthy ways of experiencing and expressing them that wouldn't manifest as physical symptoms. You notice that Francis pays careful attention to Thomas's sleep patterns, recognizing that insomnia and sleep disturbances often both cause and result from emotional distress and physical pain. The treatment plan includes specific herbs and practices designed to promote restful sleep, understanding that healing requires adequate rest and that many psychological and physical symptoms worsen when patients are sleep deprived. The monastery's approach to treating melancholic conditions also included what we might now recognize as occupational therapy and meaningful activity. Francis discusses with Thomas how he might redirect his grief and spiritual questioning into productive activities, perhaps taking on some of his deceased mentor's responsibilities, or finding new ways to serve the monastic community that would provide a sense of purpose and connection. One of the most innovative aspects of the monastic approach to psychological healing was their understanding of the importance of community support. Francis doesn't treat Thomas in isolation, but works to strengthen his connections with other members of the monastic community, recognizing that healing happens in relationship and that social support is crucial for recovery from both emotional and physical ailments. The integration of spiritual practices with psychological and physical healing was seamless in the monastic approach. Francis guides Thomas through prayers and meditations specifically designed to address his particular struggles, helping him find meaning in his suffering and reconnect with his sense of purpose and calling. This wasn't just religious consolation, but sophisticated spiritual therapy that addressed the deeper questions and concerns underlying his symptoms. Brother Francis also employs what we might now recognize as cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, helping Thomas identify and challenge the negative thought patterns that are contributing to his distress. He teaches Thomas to recognize the difference between realistic concerns and anxious rumination, and provides practical tools for managing worry and fear when they arise. The treatment plan includes specific recommendations for physical activity and movement, recognizing that exercise and bodily movement can have powerful effects on mood and emotional well-being. Francis prescribes not just gentle walks in the garden, but specific types of work and activity that will help Thomas process his grief while contributing meaningfully to the monastic community. You're particularly struck by Francis's understanding of the grieving process and his recognition that healing from loss takes time and cannot be rushed. Rather than trying to eliminate Thomas's sadness or help him get over his grief quickly, Francis focuses on helping him develop healthy ways of carrying his loss while still engaging fully with life in his monastic vocation, the monasteries. Approach to psychological healing also included what we might now call family therapy, recognizing that individual healing often requires attention to relationship dynamics and community patterns. Francis works not just with Thomas, but with other members of the community to ensure that they understand how to provide appropriate support and avoid inadvertently contributing to his distress. As the evening deepens and the garden fills with the gentle sounds of night, you witness a profound transformation beginning to take place in Thomas. Through Francis's skilled combination of listening, herbal support, spiritual guidance, and practical interventions, the tight lines of pain and anxiety in Thomas's face begin to soften, and his posture becomes more relaxed and open. The pre-dawn darkness envelops the monastery as you follow Brother Anselm into the chapel, where the ancient practice of healing through sacred sound is about to unfold in ways that would fascinate any modern sound therapist or neuroscientist studying the effects of vibration on human physiology. The stone walls seem to breathe with centuries of accumulated prayer and chanting, and you can feel the subtle resonance that builds as the community gathers for lauds, their voices preparing to create something that is simultaneously worship and medicine. You're about to discover that medieval monks were pioneers in what we now call sound healing, the therapeutic use of vocal tones, chanting, and musical vibrations to promote physical and emotional well-being. Brother Anselm, who serves as both cantor and healer, understands that the human voice is one of the most powerful healing instruments available, capable of creating vibrations that can literally reshape the body's energy patterns and promote deep relaxation and healing. The monks begin their chanting with the traditional Gregorian melodies that have echoed through these walls for centuries. But you quickly realize that this isn't just religious observance, it's sophisticated acoustic therapy. The specific frequencies and intervals used in Gregorian chant have been carefully developed over generations to create optimal resonance within the human body, promoting states of consciousness that are conducive to healing and spiritual insight. Brother Anselm explains that the monks had observed that certain types of chanting and vocal tones had specific effects on different types of ailments. Low, resonant tones seemed to help with digestive problems and anxiety, while higher, more ethereal melodies appeared to ease headaches and promote mental clarity. They had developed what was essentially a pharmacopoeia of sound, with different vocal prescriptions for different conditions. Here's something that might surprise you. Modern research into the physiological effects of chanting and vocal toning has confirmed many of the observations made by these medieval monks. Scientists have found that specific frequencies can indeed affect brainwave patterns, reduce stress hormones, lower blood pressure, and even influence immune function. The monks were using sophisticated acoustic medicine centuries before we had the scientific tools to understand how it worked. The chapel's architecture itself is designed to enhance the therapeutic effects of the chanting. The stone walls, vaulted ceilings, and specific proportions of the space create natural resonance chambers that amplify and enrich the vocal tones, surrounding the participants in a cocoon of healing sound. You can feel the vibrations not just in your ears, but throughout your entire body, as if the sound is penetrating every cell and tissue. You notice that Brother Anselm pays careful attention to the breathing patterns required for effective chanting, teaching the community techniques that are remarkably similar to those used in modern breathwork and meditation practices. The deep, controlled breathing required for sustained chanting activates the parasympathetic nervous system, promoting relaxation and healing, while also ensuring that the brain receives optimal oxygenation. The monks had developed specific chanting practices for different times of day and different healing purposes. The early morning chants were designed to energize and awaken the body's healing systems, while evening chants promoted relaxation and restorative sleep. They understood that the body's receptivity to different frequencies varied throughout the daily cycle, and they timed their acoustic healing practices accordingly. Anselm demonstrates a technique he calls toning for pain, where specific vocal sounds are directed toward areas of the body experiencing discomfort or dysfunction. A patient with chest congestion might be taught to produce deep, resonant ah sounds that create vibrations in the chest cavity, while someone with headaches might practice higher-pitched e sounds that seem to clear and energize the head and brain. Historians still argue whether the therapeutic effects of Gregorian chant were intentionally developed by the monks, or whether they discovered these benefits accidentally through their regular practice of communal worship. The evidence suggests that while the primary purpose was certainly spiritual, the monks were quite aware of the physical and emotional benefits of their chanting practices and deliberately cultivated these effects. The monastery's approach to sound healing wasn't limited to vocal techniques. Brother Anselm shows you a collection of simple instruments, bells, chimes, and wooden flutes that were used to create specific acoustic environments for healing. Each instrument was chosen for its ability to produce particular frequencies and overtones that complemented the vocal work and enhanced its therapeutic effects. You watch as Anselm works with a monk who has been suffering from chronic insomnia and anxiety. The treatment involves a combination of gentle chanting, specific breathing exercises, and the use of a small bell that produces a pure, sustained tone. The patient lies quietly, while Anselm creates a soundscape designed to slow his brain waves and promote deep relaxation. The effect is almost immediate. You can see the tension leaving the patient's body as the healing sounds wash over him. The monks had observed that group chanting was often more effective than individual practice. Recognizing what modern researchers call entrainment, the tendency for biological rhythms to synchronize with external rhythmic stimuli. When the entire community chanted together, their heartbeats, breathing patterns, and brainwaves would gradually synchronize, creating a powerful field of coherent energy that enhanced the healing effects for everyone involved. One of the most sophisticated aspects of the monastic approach to sound healing was their understanding of what they called vocal medicine, the use of specific words, prayers, and mantras that combined the power of meaning with the therapeutic effects of sound. They had developed prayers and chants for specific conditions, choosing words and phrases that not only created optimal acoustic effects, but also addressed the psychological and spiritual aspects of illness and healing. The integration of sound, healing with other therapeutic modalities, was seamless in the monastic approach. Patients might receive herbal remedies while participating in healing chants, or they might practice specific vocal exercises as part of their physical therapy routine. The monks understood that sound could enhance the effectiveness of other treatments while also providing its own unique healing benefits. Brother Anselm explains that the monks had developed what we might now recognize as vocal therapy, techniques for treating speech and communication problems. Monks who had lost their voices due to illness or injury were taught specific exercises and techniques to restore their vocal function, while those with stammers or other speech difficulties received specialized training that combined vocal technique with psychological support. The monastery's approach to sound healing also included what we might call environmental acoustics attention to the sound environment in which healing took place. They understood that harsh or chaotic sounds could interfere with the healing process, while carefully chosen acoustic environments could enhance recovery. The infirmary was designed to minimize disturbing noises while allowing healing sounds to resonate effectively. You're particularly fascinated by the monks' use of what they called silent sound periods of profound quiet that were considered just as therapeutically important as the vocal practices. They understood that healing required a balance between sound and silence, and they created spaces and times where patients could experience the deep peace that comes from complete acoustic rest. The training required to become proficient in therapeutic chanting and sound healing was extensive and demanding. Young monks spent years developing their vocal skills, learning to produce pure tones and sustain long phrases without strain. But the technical training was only part of the preparation. They also had to develop the spiritual sensitivity and compassionate intention that transformed mere vocal technique into genuine healing practice. As the morning chant concludes, and the chapel fills with the profound silence that follows deep acoustic experience, you realize you've witnessed something extraordinary: the transformation of human voice into medicine, of religious practice into healing art, of ancient wisdom into timeless therapeutic technique that remains as relevant today as it was centuries ago. The monastery bells have long since fallen silent when you find yourself in Brother Sebastian's private study, surrounded by shelves lined with carefully bound manuscripts that represent the accumulated wisdom of centuries of monastic healing. The flickering candlelight illuminates pages filled with detailed case studies, treatment protocols, and philosophical reflections on the nature of pain and healing. that would impress any modern medical ethicist or pain management specialist. Sebastian, the monastery's most experienced healer, is reviewing the records of a particularly challenging case, a patient whose chronic pain has proven resistant to all conventional treatments. You're about to delve into the sophisticated diagnostic and treatment approaches that these medieval healers developed for dealing with complex, chronic conditions that defied simple solutions. Brother Sebastian's patient files read like modern medical charts, with detailed documentation of symptoms, treatment responses, and the gradual evolution of therapeutic strategies as the healers learned more about each individual's unique needs and circumstances. The case Sebastian is reviewing involves a middle-aged monk who began experiencing severe, persistent pain throughout his body after recovering from what appears to have been a serious infection. The pain has no clear physical cause. There are no visible injuries, no obvious inflammation, and none of the usual herbal remedies have provided more than temporary relief. In modern terms, we might recognize this as fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. But the medieval healers approached it with their own sophisticated understanding of complex pain conditions. Asterisk. Brother Sebastian's treatment approach demonstrates the remarkable depth and flexibility of monastic medicine when faced with challenging cases. Rather than simply applying standard remedies and hoping for the best, he has developed a comprehensive, individualized treatment plan that addresses every aspect of the patient's condition. The case notes reveal a methodical process of experimentation and refinement that would be familiar to any modern physician dealing with complex chronic pain syndromes. The first phase of treatment focused on what Sebastian calls constitutional rebalancing, a systematic approach to restoring the patient's overall health and vitality before addressing the specific pain symptoms. This involved careful attention to diet, sleep patterns, exercise tolerance, and emotional state, with gradual adjustments made based on the patient's response. It's a holistic approach that recognizes chronic pain as a systemic condition rather than a localized problem. Here's something that might surprise you. Sebastian's treatment notes include detailed observations about what we would now recognize as the psychological and social factors that influence chronic pain. He documented how the patient's symptoms varied in response to stress, seasonal changes, social interactions, and even his level of engagement with meaningful activities. This biopsychosocial approach to pain management was centuries ahead of its time. You notice that Sebastian has been experimenting with what he calls combination therapies, carefully orchestrated treatments that combine multiple healing modalities to achieve synergistic effects. The patient might receive a specific herbal formula in the morning, participate in therapeutic chanting sessions at midday, receive manual therapy in the afternoon, and practice meditation techniques in the evening. Each component of the treatment plan is designed to complement and enhance the others. The monastery's approach to complex cases, like this one, involved what we might now recognize as a multidisciplinary team approach. Sebastian consulted regularly with other specialists within the monastery, the herbalist, the manual healer, the spiritual counselor, and even the cook who prepared the patient's therapeutic meals. Each contributed their expertise, while Sebastian coordinated the overall treatment strategy and monitored the patient's progress. Sebastian shows you detailed charts tracking the patient's pain levels, sleep quality, mood, and functional capacity over months of treatment. The data reveals a gradual but steady improvement, with occasional setbacks that required adjustments to the treatment plan. It's a realistic portrayal of chronic pain management that acknowledges the nonlinear nature of healing and the need for patience and persistence in achieving lasting improvement. Historians still argue whether the monk's sophisticated approach to complex pain conditions was based primarily on classical medical texts, or whether it developed through their own clinical experience and observation. The evidence suggests that while they certainly drew upon ancient sources, their real expertise came from decades of hands-on experience treating patients and carefully documenting what worked and what didn't. One of the most innovative aspects of Sebastian's approach is his attention to what he calls pain patterns, the observation that chronic pain often follows predictable cycles and rhythms that can be mapped and anticipated. By understanding these patterns, he could time interventions for maximum effectiveness and help patients prepare for and cope with periods of increased symptoms. The case notes also reveal Sebastian's sophisticated understanding of what we might now call the pain-fear cycle, the way that fear and anxiety about pain can actually worsen the pain experience and create a self-perpetuating cycle of suffering. His treatment plan includes specific interventions designed to break this cycle, including education about the nature of chronic pain, relaxation techniques, and gradual exposure to activities that the patient had been avoiding due to fear. You're particularly impressed by Sebastian's attention to what he calls functional goals specific, measurable improvements in the patient's ability to participate in daily activities and fulfill his monastic duties. Rather than focusing solely on pain reduction, the treatment plan emphasizes helping the patient develop strategies for managing his condition while still living a meaningful and productive life. The monastery's approach to complex cases also included what we might recognize as family or community therapy. Sebastian worked not just with the individual patient, but with the broader monastic community to ensure that they understood the patient's condition and could provide appropriate support. This included education about chronic pain, guidelines for offering help without fostering dependence, and strategies for maintaining the patient's sense of dignity and worth despite his limitations. Sebastian demonstrates a technique he calls pain mapping, a systematic process of helping patients identify and understand the specific characteristics of their pain experience. By teaching patients to observe and describe their pain with precision, he helps them develop a sense of control and mastery over their condition, while also gathering valuable information for refining the treatment approach. The integration of spiritual and psychological support with physical treatments is seamless in Sebastian's approach. He understands that chronic pain often challenges patients' faith, sense of purpose, and belief in their own worth. His treatment plan includes specific spiritual practices and counseling techniques designed to help patients find meaning in their suffering and maintain hope for improvement. You notice that Sebastian's case notes include detailed observations about the social and environmental factors that influence the patient's condition. He has documented how different seasons, weather patterns, social situations, and even the physical environment of the monastery affect the patient's symptoms. This environmental awareness allows him to make recommendations for optimizing this patient's surroundings to support healing. The monastery's approach to complex pain conditions also included what we might now call patient education and self-management training. Sebastian spent considerable time teaching his patient about the nature of chronic pain, helping him understand why conventional treatments might not work and what he could do to participate actively in his own healing process. This educational component was considered essential for achieving lasting improvement. Sebastian's treatment philosophy reflects a sophisticated understanding of the difference between curing and healing. While he acknowledges that some conditions cannot be completely cured, he maintains that all patients can experience some degree of healing, whether that involves pain reduction, improved function, better coping strategies, or simply a greater sense of peace and acceptance with their condition that the case notes reveal. Sebastian's careful attention to what we might now call treatment adherence, ensuring that patients understand and follow their treatment recommendations. He developed strategies for making complex treatment regimens manageable and sustainable, recognizing that even the best treatments are ineffective if patients cannot or will not follow them consistently. One of the most remarkable aspects of Sebastian's approach is his willingness to acknowledge uncertainty and continue learning from each patient encounter. His notes include honest assessments of treatments that didn't work as expected, hypotheses about why certain approaches might have failed, and plans for modifying future treatments based on what he learned from each case. As you review these detailed case studies with Brother Sebastian, you begin to appreciate the enormous skill, knowledge, and dedication required to provide effective care for complex chronic conditions. His work represents the best of medieval medicine, sophisticated, compassionate, and remarkably effective given the limitations of the time. It's a reminder that healing is as much art as science, requiring not just technical knowledge, but wisdom, patience, and genuine care for human suffering. Asterisk. The autumn wind whistles through the monastery walls as you accompany Brother Dominic on his rounds through the surrounding villages, where the monastery's healing influence extends far beyond its stone walls into the daily lives of the common people who depend on monastic medicine for relief from their aches and pains. Your horse's hooves clip steadily along the muddy path as Dominic explains how the monastery serves as the medical center for dozens of surrounding communities, providing care for everyone from wealthy merchants to the poorest peasants who have nowhere else to turn for help. You're about to discover that medieval monasteries weren't isolated. Religious communities focused solely on their own spiritual development. They were integral parts of the broader social fabric, serving as hospitals, pharmacies, medical schools, and centers of healing knowledge that made the difference between life and death for countless ordinary people. Brother Dominic carries with him a leather satchel filled with carefully prepared remedies, surgical instruments, and diagnostic tools that represent the cutting edge of medieval medical technology. The first stop on your rounds is a small farmstead, where an elderly woman has been suffering from what appears to be severe arthritis in her hands and knees. The condition has progressed to the point where she can barely perform the basic tasks necessary for survival: grinding grain, tending her small garden, or even dressing herself without assistance. Dominic's approach to her care demonstrates the monastery's sophisticated understanding of how to adapt treatments for patients living in very different circumstances than the monks themselves. Unlike the controlled environment of the monastery infirmary, where patients could receive round-the-clock care and follow complex treatment regimens, village medicine required practical, sustainable solutions that patients could implement with limited resources and minimal supervision. Dominic has prepared a simplified version of the monastery's standard arthritis treatment and herbal liniment that the woman can prepare herself using locally available plants, combined with specific exercises that can be performed while going about her daily work. Here's something that might surprise you. The monastery's village outreach program was essentially an early form of public health initiative, focused not just on treating individual patients, but on preventing disease and promoting health throughout the broader community. Brother Dominic spends time teaching the woman's family about proper nutrition, hygiene practices, and early warning signs of serious illness and would require immediate attention. The next stop brings you to a household where a young man has been suffering from chronic back pain following an injury sustained while working in the fields. The injury occurred months ago, but instead of healing properly, it has developed into a persistent problem that prevents him from performing the heavy labor that his family depends on for survival. Dominic's examination reveals that the original injury has healed, but the man has developed compensatory movement patterns that are creating new problems in other areas of his body. The treatment approach Dominic employs demonstrates the monastery's sophisticated understanding of biomechanics and rehabilitation. Rather than simply providing pain relief, he focuses on teaching the patient how to move and work in ways that won't aggravate his condition. This includes specific exercises to strengthen weakened muscles, techniques for lifting and carrying heavy objects safely, and modifications to farm tools and work methods that will reduce strain on the injured area. You watch as Dominic demonstrates the use of what appears to be a primitive but effective back brace, constructed from leather and wooden stays that provide support while allowing for necessary movement. The device represents the monastery's innovative approach to creating assistive technologies using available materials and traditional craftsmanship techniques. It's a reminder that effective medical devices don't always require advanced technology. Sometimes simple, well-designed solutions are the most practical and sustainable. The monastery's village medicine program also included what we might now recognize as occupational health and safety education. Dominic spends time with the farming family discussing ways to prevent similar injuries in the future, including proper warm-up techniques before heavy work, the importance of varying tasks to avoid repetitive stress, and early intervention strategies for minor aches and pains before they develop into serious problems. Historians still argue whether the monastery's extensive village outreach was primarily motivated by religious duty or practical considerations, the need to maintain good relationships with the surrounding communities that provided the monastery with food, labor, and protection. The reality was probably a combination of both, with genuine compassion for human suffering reinforced by practical benefits for the monastic community. Your next stop is a village where several families have been dealing with what appears to be an outbreak of respiratory illness, accompanied by persistent coughing and chest pain. Dominic's approach to this situation demonstrates the monastery's understanding of what we would now call epidemic disease control, including isolation procedures, environmental modifications, and community-wide treatment protocols designed to prevent the spread of illness while providing relief for those already affected. The treatment plan Dominic implements involves both individual care for the sickest patients and community-wide preventive measures. He teaches the villagers how to prepare steam inhalations using locally available herbs, demonstrates proper ventilation techniques for their homes, and provides detailed instructions for preparing nutritious broths and teas that will support the immune system and promote healing. You notice that Dominic pays careful attention to the social and economic factors that influence health in these rural communities. Poverty, malnutrition, poor housing conditions, and lack of access to clean water all contribute to the villagers' health problems, and his treatment recommendations take these realities into account. Rather than prescribing expensive remedies that the villagers couldn't afford, he focuses on solutions that use locally available resources and can be implemented within the constraints of rural life. The monastery's village medicine program also served as an early warning system for detecting serious outbreaks of disease that could threaten the broader region. Brother Dominic carefully documents the symptoms and patterns he observes during his rounds. Reporting back to the monastery with information that helps the monastic healers track the spread of illness and develop appropriate responses. One of the most innovative aspects of the monastery's community health approach was their training of local healers, village women who could provide basic medical care when the monks weren't available. Dominic spends time with these informal practitioners, sharing knowledge about herbal remedies, basic diagnostic techniques, and when to seek help from the monastery for more serious conditions. This created a network of trained healers throughout the region who could provide immediate care while maintaining connections to the more advanced medical resources of the monastery. The integration of spiritual and physical healing was just as important in village medicine as it was within the monastery walls. Dominic provides not just medical treatment, but spiritual comfort and counseling to patients and families dealing with illness, injury, and the fear of death. His presence represents hope and healing in communities where such resources were often scarce. You're particularly struck by Dominic's attention to the special needs of different groups within the village communities. Children, elderly people, pregnant women, and those with chronic conditions all require different approaches to care, and he has developed specialized knowledge and techniques for addressing the unique challenges faced by each population. Monastery's village outreach program also included what we might now recognize as health education and promotion activities. Dominic teaches villagers about nutrition, hygiene, exercise, and stress management, basic principles of healthy living that can prevent many common ailments and improve overall quality of life. This preventive approach was remarkably advanced for its time and reflects the monastery's understanding that true healing involves not just treating disease but promoting optimal health and well-being as the day's rounds continue and you visit more households dealing with various forms of pain and illness. You begin to appreciate the enormous scope and sophistication of the monastery's community health program. Brother Dominic serves not just as a traveling doctor, but as a teacher, counselor, and bridge between the advanced medical knowledge of the monastery and the practical needs of ordinary people struggling with the challenges of medieval life. The impact of this village outreach extends far beyond the immediate medical care provided. By sharing knowledge, training local healers, and demonstrating compassionate care for all members of the community, regardless of their social status or ability to pay, the monastery helps create a culture of healing and mutual support that strengthens the entire region's capacity to deal with health challenges. The winter solstice approaches as you find yourself in the monastery's most sacred healing space. Small chapel dedicated to the care of those who are dying, where Brother Augustine practices what can only be described as medieval palliative care with a sophistication and compassion that would be recognized and respected by any modern hospice worker. The room is warm despite the season, heated by a carefully tended fire that casts dancing shadows on walls, adorned with peaceful religious imagery designed to comfort souls preparing for their final journey. You're about to witness the monastery's approach to what they called the art of dying well, a comprehensive system of care that addressed not just the physical symptoms of terminal illness, but the emotional, spiritual, and social needs of patients and their families during the most challenging time of human experience. Brother Augustine moves between the beds with quiet dignity, his presence bringing comfort to patients whose earthly suffering is drawing to a close. The monastery's approach to end-of-life care was remarkably advanced for its time, recognizing that death was a natural part of life that deserved the same careful attention and skilled intervention as any other aspect of human experience. Rather than simply abandoning patients when curative treatments were no longer effective, the monks developed sophisticated protocols for managing pain, maintaining dignity, and providing spiritual support during the dying process. Brother Augustine's first patient is an elderly monk whose body is being consumed by what appears to be cancer, though the medieval healers understood it as an imbalance of humors that had progressed beyond the possibility of correction. The man is clearly in considerable pain, but Augustine's approach to managing his suffering demonstrates a nuanced understanding of pain relief that goes far beyond simple medication. The treatment combines gentle herbal remedies with positioning techniques, environmental modifications, and psychological support designed to provide maximum comfort with minimal side effects. Here's something that might surprise you. The monastery's pain management techniques for dying patients were often more effective and certainly more humane than many approaches used well into the modern era. Rather than simply drugging patients into unconsciousness, the monks developed methods for providing significant pain relief, while allowing patients to remain alert and engaged with their loved ones and their spiritual practices, the herbal preparations Augustine uses for his dying patients are carefully calibrated to provide relief without causing the drowsiness, nausea, or mental confusion that can accompany stronger medications. He has developed what amounts to a medieval version of patient-controlled analgesia, teaching patients and their families how to adjust dosages based on pain levels and individual response, ensuring that each person receives exactly the amount of relief they need without unnecessary sedation. You watch as Augustine demonstrates positioning techniques designed to relieve pressure on painful areas while maintaining the patient's dignity and comfort. The simple wooden beds have been modified with soft cushions and supports that can be adjusted to accommodate different needs and preferences. These aren't just practical modifications, but expressions of the monastery's belief that every person deserves to die with comfort and dignity, regardless of their condition. The monastery's approach to end-of-life care also included sophisticated attention to what we might now call symptom management, addressing not just pain, but the full range of physical discomforts that can accompany terminal illness. Augustine has developed treatments for nausea, breathing difficulties, skin problems, and digestive issues that are specifically designed for patients whose bodies are shutting down, and then who may not be able to tolerate conventional remedies. Rather, Augustine explains that the monks had observed that dying patients often experienced what they called spiritual pain, anguish related to unresolved conflicts, unforgiven sins, or fear about what awaited them after death. Their end of life care included sophisticated counseling and spiritual direction designed to help patients find peace and resolution before their final moments. This psychological and spiritual support was considered just as important as physical pain relief. Historians still argue whether the monastery's advanced approach to end-of-life care was influenced primarily by Christian theology about death and salvation, or whether it developed through practical experience and observation of what actually helped dying patients and their families. The evidence suggests it was probably a combination of both theological beliefs about the sanctity of life and the importance of preparing for death, combined with centuries of hands-on experience caring for the dying. The integration of family and community support was a crucial component of the monastery's end-of-life care. Augustine works not just with dying patients, but with their loved ones, teaching them how to provide comfort and support while also helping them cope with their own grief and fear. The monastery understood that death affects entire communities, not just individual patients, and their care extended to everyone touched by the dying process. You notice that the chapel includes space for family members to stay with their dying loved ones, recognizing that the presence of familiar faces and voices can provide comfort that no medicine can match. The monks had observed that patients who died surrounded by love and support often experienced more peaceful deaths than those who died alone, and they structured their end-of-life care to facilitate these important connections. One of the most innovative aspects of the monastery's approach to death and dying was their understanding of what they called good death, the belief that how a person died was just as important as how they lived. This wasn't just about spiritual preparation, but about ensuring that the dying process itself was as comfortable, dignified, and meaningful as possible. They developed specific protocols for helping patients achieve this ideal of good death. Monasteries' end-of-life care also included what we might now recognize as bereavement support for surviving family members and friends. Brother Augustine explains that the monks had observed that grief could manifest as physical symptoms: headaches, digestive problems, sleep disturbances, and general aches and pains. They developed treatments and support systems for helping survivors cope with their loss while maintaining their own health and well-being. You watch as Augustine works with a patient who appears to be in the final stages of life, his breathing shallow and irregular, his consciousness drifting between wakefulness and sleep. The monk's approach is gentle but confident, providing comfort measures while also preparing the patient and his family for what is to come. There's no false hope or denial, but there's also no despair, just honest, compassionate care that honors both the reality of death and the dignity of the dying person. The monastery's approach to pain management in dying patients included techniques that we might now recognize as forms of meditation and mindfulness practice. Augustine teaches patients how to work with their pain rather than fighting against it, helping them develop mental techniques for reducing suffering, even when physical discomfort cannot be completely eliminated. These practices often provided significant relief while also supporting the patient's spiritual preparation for death. The environmental design of the dying chapel reflects the monastery's sophisticated understanding of how physical surroundings can affect the dying process. The lighting is soft and warm, the sounds are muted and peaceful, and the air is kept fresh and clean. Even the colors and textures in the room have been chosen to promote calm and comfort, creating an atmosphere that supports both physical healing and spiritual peace. Brother Augustine's care extends beyond the moment of death itself. The monastery had developed specific protocols for caring for the body after death, treating the deceased with the same respect and dignity they had shown in life. These practices weren't just about hygiene or preservation, but about honoring the person who had died and providing comfort to grieving family members. As you spend time in this sacred space, watching Brother Augustine provide comfort to those facing their final journey, you're struck by the profound wisdom and compassion that characterizes the monastery's approach to death and dying. In an age when death was a constant presence and medical options were limited, These monks developed approaches to end-of-life care that remain relevant and valuable today, reminding us that healing sometimes means not curing, but comforting, not extending life, but improving its quality, and not avoiding death, but helping people die well. The first light of spring filters through the monastery windows as you join Brother Raphael in what appears to be an early form of rehabilitation center, where monks who have suffered serious injuries or debilitating illnesses work to regain their strength, mobility, and ability to participate fully in monastic life. The large, airy room is filled with various pieces of equipment that would be recognizable to any modern physical therapist: wooden parallel bars for practicing walking, graduated weights for rebuilding strength, and even primitive versions of exercise bicycles and rowing machines, crafted by the monastery's skilled woodworkers. You're about to discover that medieval monks were pioneers in what we now call rehabilitation medicine, the systematic process of helping people recover from injury or illness and regain maximum function despite residual limitations. Brother Raphael's patients include monks recovering from strokes, traumatic injuries, and chronic conditions that have left them with significant physical challenges. But his approach focuses not on what they've lost, but on what they can still achieve with proper training and support. The monastery's rehabilitation program was based on careful observation of the body's remarkable capacity for adaptation and recovery. The monks had noticed that patients who remained active and engaged during their recovery often achieved better outcomes than those who simply rested and waited for healing to occur naturally. This led them to develop systematic exercise programs and activity modifications designed to promote optimal recovery while preventing further injury. Brother Raphael's first patient this morning is a middle-aged monk who suffered what appears to have been a stroke several months ago, leaving him with weakness on one side of his body and difficulty with speech and coordination. The rehabilitation program Raphael has designed for him combines physical exercises to rebuild strength and coordination with cognitive activities to help restore language and thinking skills. It's a comprehensive approach that addresses all aspects of the patient's condition. Here's something that might blow your mind: the monastery's understanding of asa, neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and form new connections after injury, was remarkably advanced for its time. While they lacked the scientific vocabulary to describe these processes, the monks had observed that consistent, targeted practice could help patients recover functions that initially seemed permanently lost. Their rehabilitation techniques were designed to take advantage of this natural healing capacity. You watch as Raphael guides his stroke patient through a series of carefully graded exercises designed to retrain his affected limbs. The movements start simple, basic reaching and grasping activities, but gradually progress to more complex tasks that require coordination, balance, and fine motor control. Each exercise is adapted to the patient's current abilities while providing just enough challenge to promote continued improvement. The monastery's approach to rehabilitation included sophisticated attention to motivation and psychological support. Raphael understands that recovery from serious injury or illness is as much a mental and emotional challenge as a physical one. His interactions with patients combine encouragement and realistic goal setting, helping them maintain hope and determination while also accepting the realities of their conditions. The rehabilitation program also included what we might now recognize as occupational therapy, helping patients adapt their daily activities and work responsibilities to accommodate their limitations while still allowing them to contribute meaningfully to the monastic community. A monk who could no longer perform heavy manual labor might be retrained for lighter tasks like manuscript copying or herb preparation, ensuring that everyone could find a valued role despite their physical challenges. Brother Raphael shows you a collection of adaptive tools and devices that the monastery's craftsmen have created to help disabled monks participate in daily activities. There are modified writing implements for monks with hand weakness, special seating for those with back problems, and even adapted musical instruments that allow monks with limited mobility to participate in the community's musical worship. Innovations reflect the monastery's commitment to inclusion and full participation for all members of the community. Historians still argue whether the monastery's advanced approach to rehabilitation was influenced primarily by classical medical texts or whether it developed through practical necessity and observation. The evidence suggests that while the monks certainly drew upon ancient sources, their real expertise came from decades of experience helping injured and disabled community members maintain their dignity and productivity despite their limitations. Integration of spiritual and physical rehabilitation was seamless in the monastic approach. Raphael helps his patients understand their injuries and limitations, not as punishments or failures, but as opportunities for spiritual growth and deeper dependence on divine grace. This spiritual framework provides meaning and purpose that can be crucial for maintaining motivation during long, difficult recovery processes. You notice that the rehabilitation program includes group activities where patients with similar conditions can support and encourage each other. A monk learning to walk again after a leg injury might work alongside someone recovering from a stroke, each drawing inspiration from the other's progress and determination. This peer support system recognizes that healing often happens in community, and that shared struggle can create powerful bonds of mutual encouragement. The monastery's approach to rehabilitation also included family education and support, teaching other members of the community how to assist with recovery activities, while avoiding the temptation to do too much for patients who need to maintain their independence. This balance between support and autonomy was crucial for achieving optimal recovery outcomes while preserving the patient's sense of dignity and self-worth. Brother Raphael demonstrates a technique he calls graduated challenge systematically, increasing the difficulty of exercises and activities as patients improve, ensuring that they're always working at the edge of their current abilities without becoming overwhelmed or discouraged. This principle of progressive overload is fundamental to modern rehabilitation practice and demonstrates the monk's sophisticated understanding of how the body adapts to physical challenges. The rehabilitation program included careful attention to preventing secondary complications that could arise from immobility or altered movement patterns. Patients were taught specific exercises to maintain flexibility, prevent muscle contractures, and avoid the development of pressure sores or other problems that could interfere with their recovery. This preventive approach was remarkably advanced. For its time, you're particularly impressed by the monastery's approach to what they called adaptive living, helping patients develop new ways of performing essential tasks when their old methods were no longer possible. A monk who had lost the use of one arm might be taught to dress, eat, and write using only his unaffected limb, while someone with leg weakness might learn to navigate the monastery using assistive devices or modified techniques. The rehabilitation program also included vocational retraining for monks whose injuries prevented them from returning to their previous roles within the community. This might involve learning new skills, adapting existing abilities to different tasks, or finding creative ways to contribute that took advantage of their remaining strengths while accommodating their limitations. The goal is always to help each person find meaningful work that utilized their abilities and served the community's needs. Brother Raphael's approach to rehabilitation includes sophisticated attention to pacing and energy management, helping patients learn to balance activity and rest to maximize their recovery while avoiding fatigue or overexertion that could set back their progress. This understanding of the importance of proper pacing in chronic conditions and recovery situations was centuries ahead of its time. The monastery's rehabilitation program also addressed the psychological and social aspects of disability and recovery. Patients received counseling and support to help them adjust to their new circumstances, maintain relationships with other community members, and find ways to contribute that preserve their sense of purpose and belonging. This holistic approach recognized that true rehabilitation involves much more than just physical recovery. As you spend the morning watching Brother Raphael work with his patients, you're struck by the combination of technical skill, psychological insight, and genuine compassion that characterizes his approach to rehabilitation. His work represents the best of medieval medicine, sophisticated, individualized, and deeply humane care that recognizes each person's unique potential for recovery and adaptation. The monastery library falls silent, except for the soft whisper of turning pages as you settle beside Brother Columba, the monastery's master chronicler, who is carefully documenting the accumulated wisdom of centuries of monastic healing in what will become one of the most comprehensive medical texts of the medieval period. The afternoon light streams through tall windows, illuminating manuscripts that represent not just individual remedies and techniques, but the evolution of an entire system of medicine that has grown and refined itself through generations of careful observation and practice. You're about to witness the culmination of everything you've observed during your time in the monastery, the transformation of practical healing experience into preserved knowledge that will guide future generations of healers. Brother Columba's work represents more than simple record-keeping. It's the creation of a living document that captures not just what the monks do, but why they do it, how they've learned to do it better, and what they've discovered about the fundamental nature of healing itself. The manuscript Columba is working on represents a revolutionary approach to medical documentation. Rather than simply copying ancient authorities or recording isolated remedies, he's creating what amounts to an evidence-based medical textbook that integrates classical knowledge with centuries of practical experience. Each treatment protocol includes not just the basic recipe or technique, but detailed observations about which patients respond best, what modifications might be necessary for different conditions, and what warning signs indicate when treatments should be discontinued or modified. Brother Columba explains that the monastery's approach to preserving medical knowledge has evolved significantly over the centuries. Early manuscripts focused primarily on copying and preserving classical texts, but gradually the monks began adding their own observations, modifications, and improvements. Over time, these additions became more sophisticated and systematic, eventually developing into the comprehensive medical system you've been observing. Here's something that might surprise you. The monastery's medical manuscripts include what we would now recognize as clinical trial data, systematic comparisons of different treatments for similar conditions, with careful documentation of outcomes and side effects. The monks understood that effective medicine required more than tradition and authority. It needed evidence from actual patient care and systematic observation of what and what didn't. You watch as Columba carefully illustrates a complex diagram showing the interconnections between different aspects of monastic healing, how herbal medicine, manual therapy, spiritual counseling, nutritional support, and environmental modifications all work together to create optimal healing conditions. The diagram resembles modern systems thinking approaches to healthcare, recognizing that effective healing requires attention to multiple factors simultaneously rather than focusing on isolated symptoms or single interventions. The manuscript includes detailed case studies that read like modern medical literature, comprehensive documentation of patient presentations, treatment decisions, outcomes, and lessons learned. One particularly fascinating case describes a monk who suffered from what appears to have been chronic fatigue syndrome, with detailed documentation of how the monastery's healers gradually developed an effective treatment approach through systematic experimentation and careful observation of the patient's responses. Columba shows you sections of the manuscript that address what we might now call medical ethics guidelines for how healers should interact with patients when it's appropriate, to try experimental treatments, and how to balance hope with honesty when dealing with serious or terminal conditions. These ethical considerations were considered just as important as technical medical knowledge, reflecting the monastery's understanding that healing involves the whole person, not just their physical symptoms. Historians still argue whether the monastery's systematic approach to documenting medical knowledge was influenced primarily by classical scholarly traditions, or whether it developed independently through practical necessity. The evidence suggests it was probably a combination of both. The monks certainly drew upon ancient traditions of scholarship, but their real innovation was in applying systematic documentation methods to practical medical care. The manuscript also includes what amounts to a comprehensive pharmacopoeia, detailed descriptions of hundreds of medicinal plants, their therapeutic properties, optimal harvesting and preparation methods, and specific applications for different conditions. But unlike simple herbals that just list plants and their uses, this section includes sophisticated discussions of dosage, drug interactions, contraindications, and quality control measures that ensure consistent therapeutic effects. You're particularly fascinated by a section that addresses what Columba calls the art of healing, the intangible skills and qualities that distinguish truly effective healers from those who simply follow recipes and protocols. This includes discussions of how to develop intuitive diagnostic abilities, how to establish therapeutic relationships with patients, and how to integrate technical knowledge with compassionate care. It's a recognition that effective healing requires both science and art, both knowledge and wisdom. The monastery's approach to preserving medical knowledge also included sophisticated attention to teaching and training methods. The manuscript includes detailed curricula for training new healers, with specific learning objectives, practical exercises, and assessment methods designed to ensure that students develop both technical competence and the personal qualities necessary for effective healing practice. Brother Columba explains that the monastery's medical manuscripts serve multiple purposes beyond simple documentation. They function as training materials for new healers, reference guides for experienced practitioners, and research tools for developing new treatments and refining existing ones. The manuscripts are designed to be living documents that continue to evolve as new knowledge is gained and new challenges are encountered. One of the most innovative aspects of the monastery's approach to medical documentation is their inclusion of what we might now call patient perspectives, detailed accounts of illness and healing experiences, written from the patient's own viewpoints. These narratives provide insights into the subjective experience of illness and recovery that complement the more objective clinical observations, creating a more complete picture of the healing process. The manuscript also addresses the broader social and environmental factors that influence health and healing. Columba has documented the monastery's observations about how factors like poverty, social isolation, environmental pollution, and community conflict affect individual health outcomes. This population health perspective was remarkably advanced for its time and reflects the monastery's understanding that effective healing requires attention to social and environmental conditions as well as individual medical care. You notice that the manuscript includes detailed discussions of what we might now call evidence-based practice, systematic methods for evaluating the effectiveness of different treatments and making decisions about when to adopt new approaches or abandon ineffective ones. The monks had developed sophisticated criteria for assessing treatment outcomes and determining which interventions deserve to be included in their standard protocols. The preservation of this medical knowledge wasn't just about creating reference materials for the monastery's own use. Brother Columba explains that copies of these manuscripts were shared with other monasteries, creating networks of medical knowledge that spanned across Europe and beyond. This scholarly exchange helped ensure that medical innovations developed in one location could benefit patients in many different communities. The manuscript also includes what amounts to a philosophy of healing, deep reflections on the nature of illness and health, the role of the healer in the healing process, and the relationship between physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. These philosophical discussions provide the theoretical foundation for the monastery's practical healing work, helping to ensure that their medical practice remains grounded in coherent principles and values. As you spend time with Brother Columba, watching him carefully document centuries of accumulated healing wisdom, you begin to appreciate the enormous responsibility he carries. His work will determine whether the monastery's medical knowledge survives to benefit future generations, or whether it will be lost like so much other medieval learning that disappeared during times of war, plague, and social upheaval. Each carefully formed letter represents not just information, but the preservation of human compassion and healing wisdom that took centuries to develop. The manuscript includes detailed sections on what we might now call quality improvement systematic methods for identifying problems in medical care and developing solutions to address them. Columba documents how the monastery's healers regularly review their practices, analyze unexpected outcomes, and modify their approaches based on what they learned from both successes and failures. This commitment to continuous improvement was remarkably advanced for its time. You notice that the manuscript pays careful attention to the economic aspects of healing, how to provide effective medical care within the constraints of limited resources, how to prioritize treatments when not everything can be provided to everyone, and how to ensure that healing knowledge and services remain accessible to all members of the community, regardless of their social status or ability to pay. These considerations reflect the monastery's commitment to justice and equity in healthcare. The documentation also includes what amounts to a comprehensive disaster preparedness manual, detailed protocols for responding to epidemics, famines, wars, and other crises that could overwhelm the monastery's normal healing capacity. These emergency procedures were based on hard-won experience from previous disasters and were designed to ensure that the monastery could continue providing essential medical care even under the most challenging circumstances. Brother Columba shows you sections of the manuscript that address the training and support of healers themselves, recognition that those who care for others also need care, and that preventing healer burnout and maintaining their well-being is essential for sustaining effective medical practice. This attention to healer wellness was centuries ahead of its time and reflects the monastery's sophisticated understanding of the human dimensions of medical care. The manuscript also includes detailed discussions of medical innovation, how to evaluate new treatments and techniques, when to adopt promising innovations, and how to balance the potential benefits of new approaches with the proven effectiveness of established methods. The monks understood that effective medicine required both respect for tradition and openness to improvement and change. As evening approaches and the light in the library begins to fade, Brother Columba carefully closes his manuscript and prepares it for safe storage. His day's work represents just a small contribution to a project that has been ongoing for generations and will continue long after he's gone. The manuscript he's creating will serve as a bridge between the accumulated wisdom of the past and the healing needs of the future, ensuring that the monastery's medical knowledge continues to evolve and improve over time. * The monastery bells toll for Compline as you find yourself back where your journey began, in the quiet infirmary where Brother Thomas tends to his patients with the same gentle care you witnessed on your first night here. But now you understand the profound depth of knowledge and wisdom that informs every aspect of his practice. The candlelight flickers across familiar faces. Patients you've watched progress through their healing journeys, monks you've seen develop their skills as healers, and the timeless stone walls that have witnessed centuries of human suffering transformed into hope and healing. The patient who first caught your attention, the elderly monk with swollen, arthritic joints, sits comfortably in his chair, his pain visibly reduced and his mobility significantly improved after weeks of careful, comprehensive treatment. His recovery represents not just the effectiveness of medieval monastic medicine, but the power of healing approaches that treat the whole person rather than just isolated symptoms. You can see in his peaceful expression the profound gratitude of someone who has been truly cared for, not just medically treated. As you reflect on everything you've witnessed during your time in this monastery, you begin to understand that you've been observing something far more sophisticated and effective than the primitive, superstition-based medicine that medieval healing is often portrayed to be. These monks developed comprehensive, evidence-based approaches to treating pain and promoting healing that were remarkably advanced for their time and remain relevant and valuable today. The monastery's medical system succeeded because it was built on several fundamental principles that modern medicine is only beginning to fully appreciate. The recognition that healing involves the whole person, not just their physical symptoms. The understanding that effective treatment requires attention to emotional, spiritual, and social factors as well as biological ones. The commitment to treating each patient as a unique individual with specific needs and circumstances, and the integration of multiple therapeutic modalities to achieve optimal outcomes. Here's something that might surprise you as you consider the full scope of what you've witnessed. Many of the monastery's approaches to pain management and healing were actually more effective and certainly more humane than medical practices that continued well into the modern era. Their emphasis on gentle, natural remedies, their sophisticated understanding of the mind-body connection, their commitment to treating patients with dignity and compassion, and their focus on supporting the body's natural healing processes often produced better outcomes, with fewer side effects than more aggressive medical interventions. The monks' success in treating chronic pain conditions was particularly remarkable. By combining herbal medicine, manual therapy, nutritional support, exercise, stress reduction, and spiritual counseling, they created comprehensive treatment programs that addressed all the factors that contribute to persistent pain. Their understanding that chronic pain is a complex, multifaceted condition requiring individualized, holistic treatment was centuries ahead of its time. You watch as Brother Thomas makes his final rounds of the evening, checking on each patient with the same careful attention and genuine concern that has characterized all the healing work you've observed. His movements are unhurried and peaceful, reflecting the monastery's understanding that healing cannot be rushed, and that the healer's presence and attitude are themselves important therapeutic tools. The integration of spiritual and physical healing that you've witnessed throughout your time here represents one of the monastery's greatest contributions to the art of medicine. The monks understood that human beings are not just biological machines that occasionally break down and need repair, but complex beings with physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual dimensions that all influence health and healing. Their treatments addressed all these aspects simultaneously, creating healing experiences that were truly transformative. As the night deepens and the monastery settles into the peaceful rhythm of evening prayer and rest, you realize that you've been witnessing something timeless and universal, the fundamental human drive to heal suffering and restore wholeness. The specific techniques and remedies may have evolved over the centuries, but the compassionate intention and skilled dedication that motivated these medieval healers remains at the heart of all effective medical practice. The monastery's approach to healing offers important lessons for our modern world, where medical care has become increasingly specialized, technological, and impersonal. The monks' emphasis on treating the whole person, building genuine therapeutic relationships, and integrating multiple healing modalities provides a model for more humane and effective healthcare that addresses not just disease, but the full spectrum of human needs and experiences. Historians still debate the exact mechanisms by which many of the monastery's treatments worked, but there's no question that they were remarkably effective in relieving suffering and promoting healing. Modern research continues to validate many of their observations and approaches, confirming that these medieval healers were skilled practitioners of sophisticated medicine rather than primitive folk healers relying on superstition and luck. Preservation and transmission of medical knowledge that you witnessed in the monastery's library and scriptorium represents another crucial contribution to human welfare. By carefully documenting their observations, refining their techniques, and sharing their knowledge with other healing communities, the monks created a foundation of medical wisdom that influenced healing practices for centuries and continues to inform holistic approaches to healthcare today. As you prepare to leave this peaceful sanctuary of healing, you carry with you not just knowledge about medieval medical practices, but a deeper appreciation for the timeless principles that make healing possible. Careful observation, compassionate care, respect for the whole person, and the understanding that true healing involves much more than just eliminating symptoms or curing diseases. The gentle sounds of the monastery settling into sleep surround you, the soft footsteps of monks making their way to their cells, the distant murmur of final prayers, and the comforting silence that speaks of a community, peace with itself and its calling to serve others. The patients in the infirmary rest comfortably, their pain eased, and their spirits lifted by the comprehensive care they've received. Brother Thomas extinguishes the last candle, leaving only the soft glow of the sanctuary lamp to watch over the sleeping patients. His day's work is done, but the healing process continues even in sleep, as bodies and spirits restore themselves in the peaceful environment the monastery has created. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve those who suffer, but tonight there is rest and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. The monastery's bells fall silent, and the ancient stones seem to exhale gently, releasing the day's accumulated prayers and healing intentions into the quiet night. The work of healing that has continued within these walls for centuries will continue tomorrow and for generations to come, a testament to the enduring power of human compassion and the timeless wisdom of those who dedicate their lives to easing the suffering of others, not in the profound silence that follows. You understand that you've been privileged to witness something sacred, the transformation of human knowledge and compassion into healing practice that touches not just bodies but souls, not just individuals but entire communities. The monastery's approach to healing represents humanity at its best: wise, compassionate, skilled, and dedicated to the service of others, regardless of personal cost or recognition. As sleep finally claims you in this place of ancient healing. Wisdom, your dreams are filled with the gentle faces of the monks and patients you've come to know, the aromatic gardens where medicine grows from the earth itself, and the timeless understanding that healing is both the most practical and most sacred of human activities. The monastery's bells will ring again tomorrow, calling the community to prayer and service, and the work of healing will continue as it has for centuries. One patient at a time, one gentle touch at a time, one moment of compassion at a time. The medieval world may seem distant and primitive from our modern perspective, but in this monastery, you've discovered healing wisdom that transcends time and technology, reminding us that the most important elements of effective medicine knowledge, skill, compassion, and dedication remain constant across the centuries. The monks' gentle methods for healing aches and pains offer not just historical curiosity, but practical wisdom for anyone seeking to understand the true nature of healing and the timeless principles that make it possible. And so your journey through this world of medieval monastic medicine draws to a close, leaving you with a profound appreciation for the sophisticated, compassionate, and remarkably effective healing practices that flourished within these ancient walls. The monastery sleeps, but its wisdom endures, a testament to the enduring human capacity for healing and the timeless truth that the greatest medicine is often the gentlest, and the most effective healing happens when we treat not just symptoms, but souls.